Hong is asking for the floor.
Who is asking for the floor?
Kenny is asking. Read in the chat, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all of you. Hope you can all see us, which becomes the standard introductory phrase for any online conferences. So, dear colleagues and friends, a warm welcome to our open session number 20 on attention economy and free expression, which is co-organized by the Hamburg Media School and the Council of Europe. As we know, freedom of expression is crucial for the enjoyment of all other human rights. It enables individuals to make informed choices, participate actively in democratic processes, and that's why also the European Court of Human Rights and political decision makers refer to freedom of expression as a cornerstone of democracy. We also have to ensure that this cornerstone is not crumbling. I think that's a key role that we all have. Freedom of expression, however, is among the human rights most impacted by digitalization. Digital technologies have significantly transformed the communication patterns and behaviors of individuals, communities, societies. So it has an impact on several levels: the level of communication between individuals, the context of newsrooms and media outlets, and also the broader societal level. Communication between individuals is obviously facilitated, structured, and shaped by online platforms and social media. But beyond the euphoria around virtually unlimited access to information online and expanded possibilities to generate content, we now see that freedom of expression is increasingly shaped in multiple ways by technologies that rank speech for profit, seek to grab attention with sensationalist headlines, and encourage likes and shares. Ultimately, this crowds out analysis and nuance in favor of shocking, often hateful exchanges that silence many voices. Second, in the context of newsrooms and media outlets, micro-targeting techniques have revolutionized the new ecosystem, leading to the emergence and empowerment of new media actors, including social media platforms, and to the prevalence of business model that prioritizes clicks over readers' trust. This has reversed the flow of advertising revenues, prompting a structural shift within media markets and putting into question the sustainability of traditional media, and undermining even the conditions for quality journalism. Third, at a broader societal level, including in political communication, algorithmic systems and data-based micro-targeting tools shape our social, economic, and political lives, affect our governance, and influence the distribution of resources. Faced with these unprecedented volumes of content, it is increasingly difficult for individuals to discern what is true and whom to believe. This causes confusion, contributes to information disorder, and impacts negatively on society's trust in the media and the democratic institutions more broadly. But what is the driving force behind the complex plexus of causes and consequences? Does the cause lie in technologies themselves, or rather in the way that they are being put to use? Today, with this fantastic panel here, we will be looking at the attention economy, which embraces various uses of algorithmic systems and processes to manage, attention of individuals and groups in the pursuit of economic or other interest, and is at its multi-layered impacts on freedom of expression and on information environment. We will attempt to capture that complexity of interdependence between business models employed by major social media and digital platforms and the draining quality information and public debate. In today's debate, we will rely on Council of Europe documents and standards, in particular our Committee of Ministers declaration on the manipulative capabilities of algorithmic processes and resolution on the human rights impact of algorithmic systems, and of course on the outstanding expertise of our panelists. I am Patrick Pennings. I'm the head of the Information Society Department of the Council of Europe, and I'm humbled to be able to present our panelists today, and I will give them a short introduction, and then afterwards I will ask them a question to start off. First, we have Ms. Amy Bruyette, Senior Researcher and Editorial Manager of the Ranking Digital Rights Project for a fellow of the Center for Media, Data and Society. At Ranking Digital Rights, Amy is responsible for planning and managing the research and production of the Corporate Accountability Index and index-related communications and outreach activities. Joe McNamee is an independent consultant, Council of Europe expert on the Committee on the Freedom of Expression and Digital Technologies. Joe has worked on internet regulation since 1998. Up to the end of 2018, he was Executive Director of European Digital Rights, the association of organizations defending online human rights in Europe. He participated in the Council of Europe expert committees on the roles and responsibilities of internet intermediaries and on human rights dimensions of automated data processing and different forms of artificial intelligence. Professor Dr. Alexandra Bockart, media advisor and journalist, journalism professor, Universität der Künste Berlin, head of Digital Journalism Fellowship, Hamburg Media School, and partnering us in the organization of this event. Alexandra is also Director of Leadership Programs at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford, and she is a member of the Council of Europe Expert Committee on Freedom of Expression and Digital Technologies, and also previously participated in our work of the Committee of Experts on Quality Journalism in the Digital Age. And last but not least, Mr. Aurélien Mail, Senior Public Policy Manager in an Internet privacy company with the very appropriate name DuckDuckGo. Prior to that, Aurélien was advising tech companies on EU policies at consultancies APCO, Worldwide and Political Intelligence. Now, to start off, I will ask a question to Amy and from Ranking Digital Rights. What is the attention economy? How does it translate into the use of algorithmic systems, including for targeted advertising by social media and digital platforms? Amy, you have 5-6 minutes to give your introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the term attention economy is really what underlies, I think, the very problematic business model of surveillance capitalism, which is what we and others see as kind of the root cause of the infodemic of viral hate speech and disinformation and the other types of problems that the platforms are facing today. I'm not an expert in the term or the scholarship around this term, which spans many different fields. But what I find interesting about the actual term is that it was first coined in the early 1990s to explain how the oversupply of information, which was interestingly seen as prevalent and problematic even back then, is actually creating an undersupply of the public's attention. So there are all these new channels of information. And at the time, that was more about the 24-hour news cycle that had kind of upended the traditional print media as we knew it then. which was not only not translating into a diversity of new ideas or information, but was also creating a kind of attention deficit disorder among publics. For the news and information ecosystems, what this has meant is a decrease in quality in-depth news and an increase in sensationalist infotainment style news, more partisan commentary, the rise of inflammatory talk radio, all of that we've seen over the past decades, which has done a number on our political culture and fueled a lot of social divisions that we see kind of on full display today. And then add to this already problematic mix, in comes the tech revolution and social media, which brought unprecedented volumes of information, new channels for obtaining that information, which many argue has actually not made us any more informed. In fact, in some cases, and to the detriment of democracy, in many places, even less informed. So we have more access to news and information than ever before, but a far less informed electorate is the idea. And a lot obviously has been written and said about disinformation, particularly over the last few years, even though political propaganda as a phenomena is not especially new. What is new is the speed at which this type of content can now travel and the reach and how far it can go. And this is due primarily to an excessively opaque combination of algorithmic systems and targeting that prioritize and amplify the most sensationalist content based on likes and shares. And while we know that algorithms are often, the underlying cause of this virality, we don't know much more about how these systems work, since companies are obviously fiercely protective of these technologies, despite their immeasurable impact on public life, and despite increasing calls from civil society and regulators for more transparency. So the key question today is really about how to control the spread of harmful content without also harming human rights in the process, without undermining the same human rights that we're trying to protect. And so just to be somewhat self-promotional, last spring, RDR published 2 reports, which we call the It's the Business Model series, in which we argue that instead of seeking to hold digital platforms liable for the content posted by their users, regulators and advocates should instead focus on holding companies accountable for the underlying business model that generates and amplifies the types of harmful speech that is distorting the public sphere and threatening democracy. I won't go into it's the business model reports, but the point I'd like to make is that those reports were based on some research that we conducted on indicators that we developed to evaluate how transparent and accountable tech companies are about their development and use of algorithmic systems. These indicators were developed in part from recommendations by the Council of Europe, which set out standards for how private and public sector actors can develop and deploy human rights respecting algorithmic systems. From the Council of Europe's recommendations and from extensive feedback from stakeholders, we developed a set of new indicators that attempt to set global accountability and transparency standards grounded in international human rights frameworks for how major publicly traded digital platforms can demonstrate respect for human rights as they develop and deploy these new technologies. So circling back to the issue of the attention economy, at Ranking Digital Rights, our new indicators ultimately try to address this underlying business model of surveillance capitalism, which is based on the mass collection of user information and targeting users with content in extremely opaque ways in order to generate likes and shares. And I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Amy. That gives us a very clear picture about the speed and reach of sensationalist content on the one side, harmful content, and also the accountability for these systems and the business models that are behind it, and also gives us an idea already about the mass collection of information that comes with it. Joe, our independent expert and member of our expert committee, attention economy companies, they curate news feeds, they rank content and make decisions on whether it will stay or can be removed. They also collect data, then employed to optimize the provision of content, including by third-party advertisers. This sounds like a vicious circle to me, but what are the main interests and purposes behind such decisions? What does this mean for freedom of expression? I will let you answer that, but I will also tell the audience that they can send us question and answer questions via the Q&A box. So please send your questions to the Q&A box, and after this round of panelists, we will then proceed with replying to the questions. I already get some questions here. So Joe, please.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you to the Council of Europe for inviting me to this interesting panel. The Council of Europe has done some very interesting work, as was mentioned recently, on algorithmic decision-making and the roles and responsibilities of internet intermediaries. And Ranking Digital Rights, if anybody hasn't read their reports yet on the attention economy, they're really exceptional and move the debate forward some considerable distance. I think what Ranking Digital Rights has done is all the more valuable because we as a society have failed to understand the multiple and the changing priorities of attention economy companies. And this means that we have failed to understand their influence on our information ecosystem, in particular with regard to content moderation and content curation. And due to this failure, policymakers have consistently, and I would almost say always, underestimated the potential for self-regulation by internet economy companies when dealing with the harmful content that Patrick mentioned a moment ago. So we've seen that the attention economy lives from personal data. We've seen that, as Amy said, controversial data generates more data, and more data generates more profits. And this is the nub of the issue. The customer in the attention economy market is the person that's paying for the data, that's paying for the influence. And it's not the individual using, for example, a social media service to exercise their freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is inherently in a subordinate role in this economy. And whenever there's an issue that brings content moderation into the headlines, the call is never to protect our fundamental freedoms. The call is always from policymakers to delete more and delete it quicker, delete it automatically. We see this in recent EU proposals. Delete, 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 quicker, quicker, quicker. Amplification in the digital economy drives harmful behavior, which drives calls for more content moderation. As Patrick said, this is a vicious circle. Such content moderation is not and will not be voluntarily done in a way that harms the personal data-driven business model of a company. So the problems continue, the cycle continues. And ultimately, without corrective measures, the unbridled attention economy prioritizes noise over speech. And despite this, we continue to focus on deletion as the only solution, as if the attention economy actor was a neutral intermediary or only had one set of incentives. As Patrick said, the attention economy companies are multiple businesses at the same time. They're social media providers, but they're also newsfeed providers, they're advertising companies, they're data companies, and they're sellers of political influence. And that takes us to their decision-making process. In reality, when they don't want to, intermediaries claim not to want to be the arbiters of truth, but they remove content very often and restrict freedom of expression for any number of reasons. They do it to ensure that the business model remains valid. LinkedIn might decide not to accept posts that are not professional, for example. They do it to ensure that there's no content on the platform that would be displeasing for advertisers and would reduce revenue. They do so to avoid liability for potentially illegal content. And they do so because of the public relations value of being seen to do something good in the fight against something bad. But what we see consistently is in this area, self-regulatory and co-regulatory schemes are introduced, but without targets, without measures of success or failure, without key performance indicators, without independent review, without the underlying problems being assessed to see if they're changing or need a changed approach. And transparency data are rarely complete, consistent over time or across industry, or even in a standardized format. In sum, when it comes to freedom of expression in the digital economy, we fail to understand the nefarious effect of the business models involved. We fail to understand the problems caused by amplification, profiling, and data exploitation. When content moderation problems arise, we fail to understand the vested interests of the companies involved. And we never insist on getting enough data to produce, to assess the scale, nature, and evolution of the problems. And all of that seems to be an advertisement for Ranking Digital Rights fine work in this area. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Joe, I've known you for quite some time now. First of all, as the director of European Digital Rights, and we were already very closely working at the time together at the Council of Europe with the guide for Human Rights Guide for the Internet User, which we published some time ago. Delete, quicker. That is what I gather from your input, Joe. Thank you so much for giving us a clearer picture on who is, what are the mechanisms behind all of this. Now, I have the pleasure then to give the floor to Alexandra Bochart, as I said, from the Hamburg Media School. And thank you so much, Alexandra, also for partnering with us in the organization of this event. It's co-organized between the Council of Europe and the Hamburg Media School. So in this context, Alexandra, outside of social media, what does this mean for the business editorial choices of free media outlets that live from clicks? And inside social media, what does it mean for them when they rely on engagement? What is the overall impact on the media environment? Many questions in one, Alexandra, and I hope to be able that you're able to give an answer to that in 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick, and thanks for having me. So I've been a journalist all my life, and now I'm advising media companies, particularly local media publishers, in digital transformation. So I'm really close to what's been happening and what the impact is of the attention economy on the media industry. I mean, some of this has already been mentioned. I'll still make a point of this. The erosion of business models has had a significant impact on the media industry, because the platforms, the big platforms, Google, Facebook, has absorbed the vast amount of digital advertising revenue. So actually, the media companies can't maneuver as well with the lack of this revenue. Also, the platforms absorb much of the attention that other media used to get. I mean, people used to just, tune into journalism because maybe they were bored or they felt like, an obligation to do so. So now they're just resorting to other stuff that's on their smartphones. Most importantly, though, it's affected news consumption behavior. And I mean, it's already said something about this. First of all, the distraction effect is quite massive because people get so many distractions on their smartphones that they don't necessarily rely on news. Just think about commuting on a train. You know, people used to read newspapers. Now they're just on their smartphones chatting away or gaming. The drowning out of news in the news feed or in the stream, in the constant stream of things that pick the attention is a serious effect, and that also leads to a shortening of attention spans in news consumption because people just click themselves through stuff and distraction, and that also leads to the erosion of news brands. People say, oh, I saw that news on Facebook. The Reuters Institute did a study on that, and they can't really recall, did I see this on BBC or did I see this on German Süddeutsche Zeitung or did I see this on New York Times? They just saw it somewhere on social media. So the brands have trouble reasserting themselves. And finally, the news consumption, news avoidance is an increasing phenomenon. About 1/3 of people surveyed in the Digital News Report, which is the world's largest ongoing study on news consumption by the Reuters Institute, published every year. 1/3 of the people surveyed say they admit to avoiding news at times because it's just too much and it's just sort of too negative and too filled with an agenda. So really news avoidance is a serious consequence, because if you lose people on news consumption, then you've seriously lost them. Obviously, with the media companies, with the publishers, the attention economy has had effects on content production. News outlets are really desperate for what works. So instead of investigating in investigations and producing exclusive content, they just engage in copy and pasting what works with others to achieve fast gains and maybe grab some of that digital advertising revenue. So the copy and paste kind of journalism has really been rampant, and then that gives people less reason to pay for journalism because they find the same content everywhere. It also leads to clickbaits, and clickbait, customers click on it because they feel, oh, I have to click on it, but it's basically like consuming sugar. It raises the blood sugar, but you never really feel satisfied. So clickbait is just something that people click on and then they feel, oh, but I don't really need this. This is really not good for me. So it's actually eroding the credibility of journalism, and sometimes it's by people it's even perceived to be worse than fake news. People actually label fake news sometimes as clickbait. The rat race among media companies has accelerated because it's about, grabbing attention, about being fast. Even though in the digital sphere, collaboration is what it should be all about. Another point is news outlets have lost control over curation, that was already mentioned, at news choice, because they depend on the algorithms of platform companies, at least on social media, when they display their news on social media. And finally, news outlets have given in to producing their content for platforms of others rather than creating the platforms themselves. Just think about this. I mean, news companies, they used to have newspapers, or this was broadcasters, so they had their own platforms to publish. Now they are depending on other platforms, and this is a rat race also, because they're just chasing, where do I have to be? Do I have to be on Instagram? Do I have to be on TikTok? Where do I have to publish my news to reach audiences? Misinformation has already been mentioned. The attention economy drives the proliferation of misinformation, and that has some serious impact because this leads to a shift in agenda setting from news outlets to whoever spreads lies. So it's mainly, very often, it's politicians who spread lies or misinformation. And just to debunk this kind of misinformation absorbs a lot of energy in newsrooms that could be spent, or should be spent even, on research, on investigations, on setting their own agenda. And the attention economy, last but not least, has also influenced language and tone of publications, because it rewards any kind of speech that stands out. This can be funny speech or drastic or any kind of outrageous stuff that, you know, that gets grabbed by the algorithms. So there's actually no reward on this for complexity of explanation. Then also you have the effect on communities and on participation, because you have a dialogue and community management on news sites, and actually social media and the comments sections tend to give voice to the noisy few, and that also means sometimes those who are really interested and who would like to engage get distracted, also because, you know, hate speech is a serious issue for news outlets, and particularly female journalists are targets of hate speech in massive proportions. In the end, I don't want to be just so negative. I just want to emphasize some good things that the attention economy has also brought about, to just not let this get into a very negative tone here. Actually, the attention economy has ignited a debate about quality journalism, because maybe some journalism before didn't get the attention it deserved, and that was for a reason, just because it wasn't interesting enough, or it wasn't made for the audiences that it's actually intended to reach. So actually, I think journalism has gotten much better as a consequence of this debate. So there's actually good news to this. And the second good news is also the attention economy has opened up new platforms to reach audiences that did not consume news before on other media, because they wouldn't subscribe to a newspaper or wouldn't tune into radio or TV, even though this is basically a theoretic possibility, since there is evidence that news inequality is rising, and a serious issue actually that less people access journalism than did before. So let me end with what to do about this. First of all, and I'll address what Joe said here. There need to be indicators for quality journalism, because it shouldn't be just about deleting, but also about ranking up good content, ranking up quality journalism, for example. And there is the Journalism Trust Initiative, for example, that's run by Reporters Beyond Borders and the EBU, that develops these indicators for quality journalism. And it's been a huge collaborative effort. And I think this is really a very hopeful initiative. Also, what also to do is news media need to attract audiences by focusing on quality content and by building stable and lasting relationships with their readers. And there's actually an opportunity to really, I said that before, rethink journalism, rethink the quality of that journalism, and rethink the relationships with readers, audiences, and engage much more in debate and dialogue rather than just broadcasting news from the top. And lastly, news media need to reassert control over technology. They need to get technology wise and develop their own algorithms and technology and platforms to really reach and address the audiences they want to address. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. You gave us a full overview. And thank you also for drawing the attention to the digital news report, the Reuters news report. I think it's a very interesting source of information as well. You spoke to us about the erosion of media companies, platforms that absorb attention, the drowning out of real news, the news avoidance as well, the clickbaits which leave us with a bitter feeling at times, and especially also the lost control on curation, the editorial responsibility, and taking energy away from the newsroom in order to be able to respond to quite a bit of disinformation. Thank you also for pointing out some of the positive effects and the way forward. Now, I have a $1 million question for Aurélien of DuckDuckGo. Can there be a viable alternative business model outside the attention economy? How would it function? And can you share your company's experience on taking such a different route? Aurélien.
For sure. And let me, thank you very much. And let me answer with many millions, obviously. No, but it's a pleasure to take part in a conversation that naturally has to see with our raison d'être, kind of. You know, we are an internet privacy company, and because of widespread poor privacy practices, you know, that we've heard just before. Too many people believe that you simply cannot expect privacy on the internet, and we disagree to that. And we have made it our mission to kind of set a new standard of trust online, simply by saying that privacy should be the default and not the exception online. So people know us best for our search engine that doesn't track them. We also offer a private mobile browser and an extension for Firefox and Chrome that embeds our tracker blocking technology and protects people's privacy across the web. So we're kind of giving users all the privacy essentials they need to seamlessly take control of their personal information just with one download. And from that, I want to make one point clear from the onset, is that we provide a service that respects or even protects people's privacy while at the same time being profitable, and so since 2014. I can continue saying that it's a false dichotomy to think that a company actually needs endless amounts of personal information to run a profitable business online. And companies like Google and Facebook have led everyone to believe their business models, but that's just false. It's just that they choose to squeeze every bit of profit out of their users at the expense of their privacy rights, at the expense also of society and democracy, as we heard just. So instead of relying on behavioral advertising like they do, we serve instead contextual ads to our users in order to make money. So it means that it's a way less invasive way of making profit that works by showing people ads that relate to the keyword of their specific search, rather than to which websites they visited the week before or what they purchased somewhere else yesterday. And as we just discussed, harming privacy rights is not just a consequence in itself. It has wide-ranging societal impacts. As you know, on Google, you get results tailored to what they think you will be likely to click on based on the data profile they've built on you over time from all the tracking. But such results are in fact dangerous in terms of their consequence, simply because they show you results they will think you will click on, which necessarily means that they'll need to filter out results that they think you will skip. So that's why we call this the filter bubble, kind of putting people in a bubble by filtering out the content that they theoretically would not like. And so to take this to the political dimension that is just so critical these days, if you have political leanings one way or another, you're more likely to get results that you already agree with, and just less likely to see opposing viewpoints ever, which leads in total to increased echo chambers that are significantly contributing to an increasingly polarized society. And we backed this with some research that we did. We like to do research with our users. We conducted tests in the US, asking our users to search Google for several simple keywords steering controversy, like simply Obama or abortion or gun control. And these people received a wide variety of different results that appear to be personalized by location and other factors. And so that was in 2012 and 2018.
Thank you.
So, to conclude, yeah, I just had a final word. We're just here to prove basically that business can be a solution and alternatives to the dominant model based on behavioral ads. And so without sacrificing quality, a good third of people are already ready to take action online for their privacy. And we are confident that more people will choose services like us if given a genuine choice. But right now, it's just not the case. If I take Android, for instance, it takes more than 15 steps to set DuckDuckGo as a default search engine. And so, we need a regulatory intervention to provide these fair conditions to operate. For instance, through a menu, like a preference menu, where the user selects what default they would prefer. That would be a good first step. And we actually showed with research that if done right, this could decrease on Android Google's market share by more than 20%, and conversely bring more diversity to the market for privacy protective services. So yeah, those were the points I wanted to make, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Aurélien. Thank you also for pointing out that privacy should be the basis of our work, and that we can still have a business model that is profitable, and pointing to the false dichotomy that we would need endless amounts of data in order to be able to produce excellent news and quality information. I sometimes compare the harvesting data to the gold rush, that is, get as much as possible, which is what some companies seem to be doing, creating filter bubbles and echo chambers, and maybe also focusing on a polarized society. Now, first of all, we have a very active audience, so I will be able to ask you quite a number of questions. But before that, I just wanted to show you that in Strasbourg, the sun does sometimes shine. And for the ones that miss the Strasbourg sun, I can tell you that there is some sun here. I have one of those active participants is Mr. Guy Berger, whom you all know from UNESCO. And he has a question for all, and I'll start with that one, which is the notion of attention economy could have the connotation that human proclivities are the ultimate problem. On the other hand, different concepts like surveillance capitalism put more stress on commercial drivers in the interest of driving behavioral change opportunities. In this view, it is the system rather than the people who are the issue, which, according to you, perspective is right. Now, I would like maybe Joe to start with this, and sorry to put you on the spot, Joe, but it's easier to be able to point to someone than asking everyone to respond at the same time. Thank you. So, Joe.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, I've known Patrick for Guy for quite a long time too, and he's invariably or almost always right, and I think he's right in both of his assertions. I think it's clear that human proclivities are being exploited in the information economy, and that is driving an economic model called surveillance capitalism. So I don't quite see the linguistic nuance that he's implying. I think both terms have merit, and both terms are appropriate depending on what we're talking about. attention economy is obviously much more focused on the human aspect, as he says. But I think I don't think there's a contradiction that needs resolving. In short.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to react to? Yes, Alexandra.
I think it definitely is a structural and systemic thing, because obviously there are human proclivities that contribute to that to that development. But if, for example, if you look at majorities or minorities also of news consumers, actually most consumers of news don't want to contribute, or they don't engage in hate speech, or this is usually just, as I said before, the noisy few. So actually many people are actually they just want to consume the news, they want to live their peaceful lives. They just don't want to polarize and drive people apart. So actually the emphasis on the noisy few is a thing that is actually that is increased by, or that is driven by these systemic surveillance capitalism mechanisms that have been described.
Thank you so much. I have another question from Yannick Menesseur, who is the head of the digital development unit in the Council of Europe, who says attention economy in the context of social networks is also based on a cognitive bias, especially likes, creates engagement, but also a reward. It is well known that designers of these systems have based this system on slot machines. So how to limit these effects? Anyone feels ready to respond to that? I think I'll let you some time to respond to that. First of all, I have another question for Amy, which is accountability for business models is an interesting idea, especially if there are negative impacts on the wider environment, such as the fossil fuel industry. Would the aim be to regulate a model or require offsets, Amy? It's another question from Guy Berger. So next time, I think we'll have to invite Guy on the panel.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. I'm not sure about the fossil fuel offset piece, but I do think that there's probably some overlap with the environmental industry. From the perspective of RDR, we look at kind of addressing the more structural aspects of surveillance capitalism. In particular, we would advocate for companies to be legally required to conduct human rights impact assessments on the development and use of algorithmic systems and targeting, in the same way that environmental impact assessments are required in other fields. So our research has also shown that very few companies are actually conducting risk assessments on these technologies, which is a fairly big deal given how much of an human rights impact these processes have across these different platforms. So that's in our opinion, that's one of the core ways to address the business model question, is to advocate for regulations that would require impact assessments. We would also advocate for other types of transparency-based regulations, which would require companies to disclose, for instance, how they develop algorithms, what user data they use to develop the algorithms, and to give users more control and choice over that information.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amy. I have a question from Ibrahim Sisse, who says, I think
Excuse
it's
me,
directed
Patrick, if I may just...
Yes, Aurélien?
No, if I may just add something to Amy's answer. I mean, another solution is to also tackle the underlying root of the business model, and we've seen recently some good proposals from the European Parliament, or at least some suggestions to tackle the widespread use of behavioral ads and at least to move towards restrictions on the collection of data for the purpose of serving behavioral ads. And these would be the kind of measures that would actually address the underlying cause of what we are talking now.
Okay, thank you, Aurélien. I think the next question is also for you, from Ibrahim Sissa, who says, I personally love using BGGG and encouraging people around to do so for privacy, but the problem is about its accuracy compared to Google search. What can explain this? And do you think communities, users can do something to improve DDG's accuracy?
So thank you so much for being a user and a fan and spreading the word. I think it has largely to see with habits. I've mentioned before the fact that Google uses certain ways to personalize content. Google also adds large numbers of additional Google generated answers to its queries when people are looking for something. And so I think it's largely a matter of habits, of being used, of having Google serving content that has been filtered out of things that they think you wouldn't like and click on. And also the fact that increasingly when you are looking for something, the whole first page and even by scrolling down would be full of Google generated content and not, as opposed, to the 9 organic links. And we think it's also another tactic, to keep people inside the Google ecosystem and to drive them out from the rest of the web. So yeah, I think it's just a different approach to how we serve content.
Okay, thank you, Aurélien. I have a question. I'm going to make use of the panel for my personal interests, and that is I will be speaking to the International Communications and Consultants Organization this afternoon, which is basically gathers all the communication industry. And what should be my key message to that industry? What should I give as a key message to those service providers, commercial service providers, obviously? So what would you give me as an advice? Alexandra, I see you smile, so you'll since you smile, you'll have to answer.
Oh gosh, it's all about quality content, really. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, we've been facing this overabundance of news and the misinformation debate. So really making sure that communication is fact-based and it's quality. It's quality communication. This is really the key message, and not about like he said, she said, all kinds of attention grabbing, polarizing quotes and snippets, but about facts and data. I mean, we've been witnessing this in the ongoing presidential election in the US, that if someone declares a victory, it doesn't necessarily mean this is true. So really be very factual and produce quality content. That would be my key message to communication, to the communication sector.
Anyone else? Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I do think that the message would be kind of to capitalize on their assets, and their assets really are, that they can be the provider of quality journalism. So it's almost like back to the basics, back to the workshop, and try to kind of foster the original things that journalism should be doing quite well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Joe, would you like to react to that?
I'm not sure if you can still see me. My video appears to be playing up again. I think reminding the market of the value of competition would be good. I think the the economies of scale are driving these problems and are also driving companies, driving a market that isn't a market anymore. So I think talking to market players, a reminder of the value of competition would be timely.
Okay, thank you. One more question, because we're unfortunately already nearing the end, is for Amy, also from Guy. Accountability for business models is an interesting idea, especially if there are negative impacts on the wider environment. Oh, I already read this one, didn't I?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry for this one. Okay. Okay, and then Alexandra, is journalism a victim of the net company's business model or a victim of its own institutional and historical inertia? And if the latter, how can journalism and news outlets compete for attention without compromising content and without getting into the data harvesting and manipulative sales models? You've already started replying to that in the chat box, but I would like to hear you about this.
Yeah, it's a bit both. And I would suggest that all the parties that are mentioned address their own issues and their own homework. So obviously, and I said that in my initial remarks, journalism really has to reassert itself and to focus, to lead a quality debate. What is quality journalism, and has journalism been good enough? Has it been interesting enough? Has it been relevant enough? And has the tone been right? And to mention the digital news report, again, in the 2019 issue, there was a question, the audience was surveyed, what do you think about the news media that you consume? And actually the lowest ratings that people gave were for relevance of topics covered and the tone, so that most people feel like felt the tone was too negative and it's too much, and it's just an overabundance of news. So there should be much more selection and much more thought about audiences. So there's a lot the media industry can actually do to improve their journalism, also to be less preaching from the pulpit, or less broadcasting, but more engaging and building relationships, stable relationships of trust with their audiences and their readers. Nevertheless, it is obvious that the platform companies have their share of responsibility. So I wouldn't want to let them off the hook, but everyone, the platform companies on one hand and the media companies, publishers on the other, should really address the issues they can tackle themselves. I wouldn't let anyone off the hook here.
Thank you so much. So a last question to all of you. Is regulation then the solution? And if yes, what exactly would we then need to regulate? Leaves you...
on this, if I can...
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. No, I would like to I've mentioned just before what can be done on behavioral advertisements, but I like to come back on what I said on competition. As a business here, we prove that there can be business models, quality alternatives that don't rely on these business models that we've talked about. But right now, the web ecosystem is held, by a handful of companies, and obviously, as us competing against Google, we are in the first line of being affected by their exclusionary practices when they leverage their dominance on platforms they control, for instance, Android, to push their own services and to give few visibility to rivals. And so I would say that one solution is to give consumer a fair choice when choosing their services of preference. And this would be a first step towards a more diverse market share that responds to the demand for more privacy and more trust online.
Thank you. I have Alexandra, and then we'll have to close, unfortunately. Alexandra?
Yeah, I mean, of course, regulation is important because there's no democracy without regulation. I mean, this is the very core of democracy, to come up with solutions to challenges and to problems. The question is what we regulate, and obviously that is a fairly complicated issue. And yeah, maybe let me get back to the slot machine thing, because none of us addressed that so far. So actually, regulating design of platforms in some fashion would be, or coming up with standards how to design platforms that they don't exploit certain human proclivities would be an option. I mean, I wouldn't really put the regulation in that direction of just taking down content and giving the powers to take down content to platform companies. But there are many ways we could regulate, and hopefully not just in the terms of services that no one reads, but maybe even also making it easier for individuals to find redress or to really voice their concerns.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm cutting you off a little bit. I want a one-word answer of Joe and Amy, which is regulation, yes or no?
In a word, yes.
And Joe disappeared from my screen. I don't know, Joe, if you're still there. Anyway, this was also an opportunity for you to give a last round, and I've been moving away with the sun, as you saw. Thank you to all the panelists for this very insightful. Oh, Joe is there. So yes or no to regulation, Joe? I can't hear you. Your microphone is switched off, unfortunately.
Competition is already regulated. Data protection, thanks to the Council of Europe, among others, is already regulated. Transparency should be regulated in relation to, particularly to issues around content moderation and curation. So yes to regulation, careful regulation, and regulation that's reviewed frequently.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We will be cut off shortly, so I'll try and sum up. Thank you so much to all the panelists for these very insightful interventions, and thank you also to all the participants in this early hour for their interest in the session. I think this was a very rich and fruitful debate, providing a lot of food for thought for all experts and institutions working on this intersection of freedom of expression and digital technologies. The outcomes of the debate will certainly also feed into the Council of Europe expert committee on freedom of expression and digital technologies, who is right now preparing a draft recommendation on the subject, on the impacts of digital technologies on freedom of expression. So at a later stage, we will be also organizing public consultations on this draft, where you will be further, where you can further provide your input and expertise. I also seize this opportunity for you to visit the Council of Europe booth in the IGF virtual village, and we will see each other later in other sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.